Let's start defining some metadata for our photosynthetically active radiation case study. We have our PAR deployment folder with the pipeline in it. We can go to the protocol folder, open up R using our RStudio project file. Now we want to put our metadata as close as possible to our data, and our management of our metadata as close as possible to our data. So ultimately, we want to put another R markdown file in here that is going to render to a file in our product containing the metadata. In many cases, people are going to know where to look for metadata by looking for a file called readme. If you look at the files that compose the data product, a lot of times you'll see a file with them called readme, and that readme is going to tell you something about the data product and how to find everything within that data product. So in our protocol folder, we want to start a new R Markdown file. And we're going to use this processing RMD as a model. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. This is the RMD file, or the R Markdown file, that we created for processing the data product. And I'm going to create a new R Markdown file. And I'm going to ignore this because whatever it puts in here by default, I'm just going to replace. And I want to do something very similar to what I'm doing before in terms of my default setting for the chunks. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy my YAML header as well as this first chunk from processing. And I'm just going to overwrite everything that's in this new R Markdown file by default with that. And instead of just being par deployment here, I'm going to call this the par deployment metadata. And I can save this file into my protocol folder right next to my processing file. And again, so they show up in alphabetical order, or the alphabetical order will have them show up in the order that they're run. I'm going to call this to underscore metadata.rmd. I can either add the RMD here or it will add it by default because I'm saving it as this type. Oops. So to underscore metadata save. Now I've got this metadata RMD file. And also I'm going to need to be able to compile this file. So I'm going to do something very similar to what processing.r is doing. So I'm going to go back to this folder and I'm going to create a copy of processing.r, but I'm going to rename it to underscore metadata.r. If I refresh this, everything's now in alphabetical order: processing.r, processing.rmd, metadata.r, metadata.rmd. And I can bring up this metadata.r. It looks like I need to refresh this. I'm going to go in and out of my protocol folder. There it is. So I've got a metadata.rmd and a metadata.r. There's a few things that I need to change here to be appropriate. First of all, the comments aren't correct here. I'm going to say render the metadata, rather than processing notes, metadata R Markdown file to an HTML formatted README report. And this is not going to be in the incremental pipeline. This is going to be in the product pipeline folder. Then I just need to change these appropriately. This is not going to be processing the processing RMD anymore. I'm going to hit tab here, have RStudio do an autocomplete, and it's to metadata RMD. I'm still going to be compiling it to an HTML document, but it's not going to be going to the incremental folder. It's going to be going to the product folder. Now this trailing slash doesn't really hurt anything, but I typically take it off. I don't think it really matters whether it's on there or not. And finally, it's not going to be called processing notes.html anymore. It's going to be called readme.html. And as before, my init root directory is going to be the current working directory. As mentioned in a previous video, we're going to be modeling what we put in our metadata from EML more specifically from the EML that is required by the EDI repository, or the Environmental Data Initiative repository. I'm going to look at their easy EML file builder in order to help us understand what they require. And if you go to their easy EML builder, you can do that by creating an account with them. And you'll bring up a page for the easy EML that looks something like this. Across the top of the stream, you'll see menu options. One of those says EML documents, and from here you can create a new one or open an old one that you already have running or you've already started, or you can close the current one. I've gone ahead and created one here that I've just called LRES 511 blank. So this is what it looks like when it's blank and when you just bring up a new form and you haven't filled anything in yet. Across the left here, you'll see all of these different categories, and these are the categories of metadata that need to be filled in. And the ones with the red mark by them have critical errors or warnings that are telling you that, well, I don't have the information I need. So that tells you something about what's required about the metadata. And these are the different topics or the different categories of metadata that really define the organization of metadata that you need for an EML file, or at least the vision of that is presented to us by the Environmental Data Initiative and their tools. Now, I don't actually like the order these are in because I don't think they make a whole lot of sense to me in terms of the order I would like to see. So we're not necessarily going to put everything in the same order, but we are going to start with a very similar order to what they have at the very top. So their metadata starts with a title, and it does make that sense for that to be at the very beginning. You need to define some sort of title for the metadata. And right now we have title highlighted, so you can see this tool gives us the ability to fill in a title here in this web form. And the next thing on the list are data tables. And data tables are just one kind of data that you might have included with a particular data product, or one type of file that you might have. And they put that near the top because really everything else kind of pivots around tabular data when you're talking about EDI's approach. And it's really common to store data in tabular format. That's just what humans are used to seeing, I think, and how humans are used to thinking about data. So we have data tables at the top, but there are ways to put other kinds of files in with these data products. And those are listed under things like other entities that are way down here at the bottom. So this is getting us started on our path to defining metadata, and that we have to give a title and we have to define the data tables that we want to include with our data product. So let's start putting things like title and data entities into the metadata for our data product. I'm going to go back to our R session, and I'm going to go back to the metadata.rmd file that we have started. And maybe we want to start our metadata with the same thing that we started with in EasyML, and that's a title. That makes sense to put first in this folder. So as our first major heading in this markdown, we're going to have title. And what I like to do is put all of the data entities associated with a data product and the description of them all in one section, rather than splitting up between where the data tables are and where other data entities are. So the next major section, I'm just going to call data entities. That's the section that has all of the data entities in it. Now in this case, my data entities are associated with the deployment of a particular instrument. So I want to start thinking about making sure that where this deployment occurred is clear in my metadata. And I also have more than one file associated with it, right? I have a data table with the data in it, but I also have a data visualization. And those are coming from the same place. One's just the visualization of the data from that table. So perhaps I want to keep all of these together in a particular subheading or subsection here that I'm going to call deployment for par underscore LL par 01. And this is a little bit more information about a particular deployment, this indicating it's a par sensor I'm deploying, and this LL, oops, I got that in the wrong order, LLPAR01 is the name of the site where this was deployed from our site list for our particular project. So that gives us some information about where this deployment occurred. And then after that, we're going to have some information from that deployment. And in this case, we have at least one file that I'm going to call data table, saying that we have a table of data from this deployment. So this is getting us started with our README. I'm going to go ahead and save this metadata.rmd file. Maybe I'll put a couple carriage returns there. And this will just do a quick run to make sure that this is working okay. I like to run very frequently when I'm coding just to make sure that I'm off to the right start and that I know where the bugs are when they occur, because I haven't written that much code between when I test my code. So I'm going to go back to the metadata.r file. I'm going to run this, and it's going to render that R markdown file. But this time it should be putting what results into the product directory. So if I go to the product folder of the pipeline, I should now have a readme.html file. I'm going to click on this and bring it up in my web browser. And here are the headings, the title, the data entities. Those are both first level headings. Then I have the second level heading for the deployment, and then the third level heading for the data table associated with that deployment.